Welcome to the Empowered Team podcast. I'm Kari Schneider, and I'm so lucky to be joined by Manny Fiteni. Did I say that right? I want to double check.
You did well.
I love it. Thank you. Okay, and I'm going to be just adoring your accent here because you're coming in from Queensland, Australia, and we just love the Australian accent. I haven't been there for years. But what I'm most excited about, aside from your accent, aside from connecting with you, is your background. You love helping leaders really get into that transformative zone where they can really optimize their performance, help other people, lead effectively. And you have a business, you're the founder of Mind Growth 360, creators agency as well, which is a brand elevation platform. And you do training and development, which is leadership and personal transformation. So you have a number of things going on. I'm just mentioning the tip of the iceberg here. So
There's a lot more actually.
What's that?
There's a lot more than that, but that's coming out still.
Exactly. So share a little bit more about who you are, what you do, and what you offer for people who are really looking to perform.
Okay. So maybe a little bit of background. I had a corporate background for the majority of my life. Finance, financial planning, did the roles. I mean, I worked my way up from the bottom to executive roles, etc. But I've always had a passion, probably from the age of 18 or 19 when I left school originally, in personal development. And I was always fascinated by people that could do more than other people. So this has always been a burning desire at the back of my mind. And so hence, over the years, I got the opportunity to take the learnings that I was getting along the way and use them with people that worked for me. So I may have teams of 40 to 300, but the opportunities, and not that they necessarily knew, but the techniques that I was learning that most people probably know if you've been doing courses, I was able to use and then fine tune and then apply them. So I had been in management for well over 35 years, but I'd never, ever, and your audience is probably a little different, but I'd never, ever had the conversation around mindset in an executive meeting, ever discussed. Now, I knew it because it was my own personal interest, but it wasn't something you discussed in a meeting. But I think it's one of the most important parts, and it's why a lot of managers fail. And we can talk about that as we go.
Okay, this is you're diving right into it. I love it. You've developed 3 pillars: environment, true leadership, and mind congruency. So bring us into first about how those managers were failing, because this is a problem in every managerial environment because they're bogged down with what needs to be done, the logistics,
Absolutely,
the people issues. And if they know nothing about mindset, they're just trying to put out fires. You know it, you've seen it. So they're putting out fires. What did you see them struggling with, or maybe your team struggling with, or yourself struggling with, that had you develop something that could really make a difference?
So the first observation is that most people are managers, not necessarily leaders. And there's a distinction there. And the distinction essentially is that a lot of people are promoted into management because they're either good at their previous role. Now, I see you smiling, so you kind of get this. And I'm sure most of your listeners are thinking exactly the same thing. So they're promoted into a position, they're given zero management training. And in a lot of cases, no one's ever given any management training. They're just put into a management role. Now, depending on their background and their pre-programming or their prior programming, determines on how they interact going forward. So for some managers, if there's an ego involved, then they love the power that comes with being a manager. But a lot of managers have the right intentions, but they don't necessarily, unless you're put in certain situations and you have learned to overcome certain things, all you are really doing is projecting your own programming onto your own staff. So until that programming changes, then you're going to struggle in the same circumstances over and over again. It's a little bit like an abusive relationship. You leave one, I'm not going to have that man or woman ever again, but you do. Until that changes, your management style doesn't change either.
Okay. So I'm going to dig into specifics here simply
Yeah,
because
sure. Yeah.
until people hear it, sometimes they can't recognize it for themselves. So when you're speaking of projecting their own programming, and one example you gave already was, let's say they get the ego power of being promoted, and they're being promoted because they performed so well, but they're not being promoted because they're necessarily a people person. They're looking to develop other leaders. They are visionary. They're being promoted because they performed so well. And now perhaps they're projecting that they love being better than other people or outperforming other people. And what may happen with that or other examples of projecting their own thing onto their group?
So if we talk about, and I'll talk about the mind congruency that you mentioned earlier, and I'll explain that and then I kind of falls into that. So mind congruency is a term that I use. So we all know that we have a conscious mind, and most of science accepts we have a subconscious mind. Now, this won't be new to you. The subconscious is developed it's from the day you're born, very young age. The subconscious comes in at a later stage. Now, what happens is when you're a child, you learn various ways. You learn from observation mainly. You know, if you're in the car with your parent and they start screaming at everyone on the road, there's probably a pretty good chance you become that later on when you start driving. It is something that is learned without intention. So, for example, a parent will go do something and you end up copying it. You don't know why. There's a lot of times that we all say, oh, I can't stand my parent who does that. But you tend to copy it later on yourself and you can't help it. So conditioning or pre-programming is what sits in this subconscious. As we get older, the conscious mind comes in, the area that is more analytical, that makes decisions, it makes the New Year's resolution and says, I'm going to lose weight this year. But guess what? Behind the scenes is the operating system, which is called your subconscious. It's determining what you're actually going to do. So there's this battle between the two, and this happens in management as well. The way you're operating is something you've learnt from before, and it's probably the way you were brought up. So part of what I do is I work on elements of management and the mind in particular, which never gets brought up in meetings.
So in the meetings, they're talking about the actions, the KPIs, the things that
Absolutely
need to be done. And yet you're realizing that behind the scenes, if they're not addressing the person's maybe unaddressed subconscious, we'll call it mindset right now, if they're not addressing that, the likelihood of the metrics being achieved is lowered. Would you suggest that?
So I'll give an example. I was sitting at a breakfast with a CEO of a major mortgage broking company, which I worked for at the time. I just joined them some years back. And he made a comment, I don't know how it came up, but he made the comment to me and someone else that was there waiting for other people. It's all about the numbers. Now, I don't disagree with that sentiment. It is the bottom line, is your numbers. But I made the comment to him, I said, you don't get your numbers without the people. So until you know how to get the most out of your people, you don't get your numbers. And all that happens is you go, well, let me replace them because they're not very good. And that becomes a cycle.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to break that cycle, you have to understand how these people operate and how you're operating and influencing that.
So it really comes down to the individual leading the people so that they can help not only be the example, but be able to tap into someone else's best. And that brings me to the question of what are some of the key traits of a high performing manager? versus a high
Good point.
performing leader? Because you differentiated between the two. What would you say are the key
A
traits?
high performing manager is not aware of their own operating system. They're not aware of how they operate and how even they're perceived sometimes. In regards to a leader has in some ways taken more control of how they operate. They can identify when something isn't quite right. They can pick up on minute things that people do. Now, this is a skill set in itself to be able to say, I saw something in Kari just did, well, I said something to her and there was a very minute change in her face. Not massive, but it was real. But most people don't pick it up. They just go, yes, whatever. It's just, I'm still talking. As opposed to, hold on, that's not resonating. And when you get the little indicators, then you start to understand. Now, you talked about traits, and I always write these things down. So let me, if you want, I can go through some of the traits if you prefer.
I'd love that.
Okay. There's about, I have 11 traits that I talk about for high performing leaders. The first one is the power of us. So it's a mentality that you drive through your team, that it's about us. Now, within every team, you're always going to have the top salesperson, and it's all about them, and it's about getting the numbers and about getting their commission if that's, or bonuses. And that's okay because it happens in management too. But when you have a mentality that we are here together, so I give a little bit of a story sometimes when I'm talking to groups about when I was in, well, we call it primary school here. I'm not sure what you call it in Canada, but in primary school, I can remember there was a kid who probably was a natural leader. And one day and every week we would have a sports afternoon. But this sports afternoon, they decided to change it up because we would play different types of sports. But this time around, we played a team type environment whereby one portion of it was we had to run around an oval, around the outside of this oval. And we were still fairly young kids, we were probably maybe 9 or 10 years old. But we had to run around it, but you had to run it around as a team within a certain time frame. So if the whole team didn't make it, you failed the exercise. Now, he wasn't the fastest kid. I wasn't the fastest kid either. But what he did, he took the person that he knew that could do this quite well, and that person paced us. And together we worked as a team. So we didn't leave anyone behind. We kept together the whole time. We thought about the whole team. We were watching each other to make sure we made it. Now, that's some type of illustration of the power of us, is that we're always thinking about how we together get across the line, not just me. It's okay if I still do really well. That's important to me. But I'm also thinking about the power of us. So that's trait number one. Trait number two, well, it's almost the same thing. It's team first. It's always thinking about the team. Mindset, well, we've talked a little bit about that. We can talk more about that. The other one is consult. And I talk about management styles. When I train people, I give them the 9 or so management styles that are out there, and I can show you that shortly of how I go about doing that. But a manager needs to also consult. So when I headed up a financial planning unit in a bank, and I had a sales team or financial planners, and we didn't have enough to cover the whole bank. And they all had targets to send business to us, but we couldn't keep up, and it was affecting their bonuses. So we had to manage all these branches, and it was a growing branch network at the time. And I would make decisions to try to cover them and then move them there. And we were constantly moving personnel around. But what I did do is, before I said, right, now you just go here and you do this and you go do this, I would ring the individual and say, these are my thoughts. This is why I'm thinking I'm going to do this. And then I'll let the person tell me why we should or shouldn't do it. And someone will come back and say, Manny, you haven't considered this fact. And I go, you're absolutely right. I hadn't considered this fact, because I'm not in the field with you anymore.
Mhm.
And so consultation is really important, not in every circumstance. And when I talk about management styles, and there are different styles, in some circumstances, we don't need to consult anyone. Everyone's looking to the leader to make the decision. But when you're affecting someone's livelihood, you kind of want to involve them in some way. Open door policy, I think, is pretty straightforward. I'm sure a lot of your managers have heard this before, but not all managers do it. And what I mean by that is that we've all worked for other people. There's some people that you feel I can knock on your door and I can sit down and I know that you're going to listen to me and you're going to hear me. There's other people that you go, there's no point or I'm too scared.
Mm-hmm.
And when your team is scared of you, that's a style that doesn't necessarily always work for everybody. And so I think you need to have that. People have to feel that it's like a relationship. If you're with your partner and your partner feels too scared to say, look, I really don't like what you're doing, do you have a relationship? And that
Mhm.
applies in leadership as well. Active listening, I think you've probably heard all that before. So that's fairly straightforward. The other one is back them. I've seen this on so many occasions in my career whereby a manager is put in a position that a staff member's maybe done something incorrectly, not intentionally. It's not like they stole intentionally, but they did something incorrectly. And the rest of an organization has decided to cancel them, which is probably more appropriate in today's world, to cancel them and say, well, let's get rid of them. They're bad. And a real leader can determine if they should remove them or if they shouldn't remove them. If the person has been a great operator the whole period that they've been with you, why would you remove them unless it is a grave mistake? So back them is really important. And what this does is when you back people in your team back you. They know that you're in it with them. So when we talked about team first, you can't be separate from your team. You are part of the team and they will support you. And you see this in everything from, maybe not politics is a great example, but we see this in a lot of things is that when you're there for your people, they're there for you when you need them. They'll do things out of hours because they know you would have done it for them. So I think that's a really important one. Improvement's one of them. We're so busy. You described at the very start how we're always busy. We've got so many things on our plate that we forget to improve the individual, upskill them, help them, coach them. Now, some people are natural coaches and some people just don't have that ability or that inkling, but it's really important. Integrity and honesty. I think that most people can smell when you're lying to them. Not always. Some people are very good, and I've worked with people that you would never guess that they're lying.
Mhm.
Having said that, when you're caught, you lose integrity, and people will still work for you because they have to, but they're not going to respect you anymore. And this is a key that if any of your listeners think that it's something that they're being smart and manipulative, they're able to manipulate people, then they should rethink that because your team will know and your team will either leave or you'll get the people that suck up to you. And you think that that's really great, whereby I look at it and go, they're only doing that to save their own skins or to get promoted. The last two is cut your losses. It's if you can't improve them, if you can't get the result that you need in a time frame that's you need to, then you need to know when to cut your losses. And especially if someone is the person that doesn't want to be part of the team, it's just about them and they don't care about anyone else. And finally, observation. If you're not observing people, too many people talk and they don't hear anything. And that goes back to the active listening, right? But the observation of hold on. I've just had a conversation with Kara, and if I play that back in my head, when I said this, there was this reaction. It wasn't a massive reaction, but it was a slight thing. And I know that bothered her. And I need to address that somehow. Now, it doesn't matter how many things are on your plate. I had a million things on my plate in lots of my roles. But I always knew that my people had to come first because they got me my results.
It sounds like with that observation, it falls back into something you said earlier about, seeing some of the micro expressions, seeing some of the small things that are these nuances, these human communication nuances. And there's some people that I've interviewed that have said or alluded to that those who are entrepreneurial, not necessarily, so those who have started their own businesses and pushed forward that way, those who are entrepreneurial tend to have more trauma in their backgrounds, and that leads them to have more tolerance of the chaos that ensues when starting a company or starting their own business. Do you think that's true just out of your own opinion, or have you
I'm not,
encountered anything
I'm,
like
I'm
that?
not sure if that necessarily is the key thing in entrepreneurs, that they have to have a trauma.
No, and I don't mean have to have one, but there's a greater propensity of that within entrepreneurs.
So what I notice with entrepreneurs, and I think I'm an entrepreneur nowadays, is persistence. Now, if I reflect back on my career, I was persistent on things that I was trying to chase within my corporate career. But then there's been other times that I've tried things on the side and then tried them and gone, oh, give up, go back to my career, right? I had to learn. I think when you experience challenges in life, and it isn't just in business, I think when you are challenged and you learn that, you know what, someone's going to hit me. It's a little bit like a boxing match. I was watching something last night on a world champion English boxer back in the 1800s. It was just his life story. That was more the history that interested me. But it talked about how the difference between the great boxer and the average street fighter, or maybe the average person, is that they know how to take a punch. So if we got into a fight, we go, hold on, I've been hit before. This hurts. I thought it's okay when I'm hitting you. And that's the same thing with entrepreneurs. Their mindset has got to a point that it doesn't matter if you hit them. Is it disappointing? Absolutely. But there's now part of their operating system says, keep pushing, keep moving forward, readjust, find a different solution. This applies to leaders as well, but entrepreneurs in particular need to have that type of mentality because they're going to fail and it's all on their shoulders.
Less of the focus on the problem or the failure or the hit, whatever it's been, more of the focus on what has to happen next. How do I get through this? What's the solution? What's the next step? A greater focus on that next step or that solution than oh my gosh, I just got hit. This is so awful.
If you ever read biographies of people that are successful, every single one of them has had adversity. Every single one of them. And we all do, by the way. It's it's the learning we get from it and what we do to move forward. And until you learn how to keep moving forward, you'll move back and give up. It's a little bit like when you left school, I'm sure you had certain dreams. I'm going to do this. I'm going to have this type of job. I'm going to own this type of house. I'm going to own this type of car. Now, some people achieve it sooner or later, but others also give up and go, you know what? I'll just go to another dream today. And that dream now fades. And what entrepreneurs do is they go, I still understand the dream. I may have to pivot. If you look at most technology that you see in the marketplace, It didn't start out the way it started out. It started off as a different type of technology, and then they realized this is not working. I've got to pivot. So the mindset is either I give up, not working, or I'm gonna change.
You've really explored this. You've made a system around it to help other people. For you personally, what has been the toughest thing that you've had to overcome in order to really gain that perseverance for yourself? What's been the greatest
I
struggle that
think,
you've
look,
overcome?
I've had periods with job loss during the GFC. I was out of work for a while because it hit my industry in particular. So you just couldn't get a job, and I was getting older. And so you're kind of thinking, I'm finished. I'm all right. It's all over. And that would have been my original way of thinking for a lot of things at some point. Going, oh, well, I'm done. But I didn't. I learned along that journey that I didn't wait. Firstly, I didn't waste any time. The period that I was out of work, the amount of knowledge I have in technology now is massive for someone at my age in particular. The amount of technology we're building at the moment that's coming out the next 6-8 months, which will help leaders, etc., but also personal development. It allowed me to keep pushing. And now I have a different attitude whereby once upon a time I would have gone, no, just go back and find a corporate role. Now I go, no, I just keep pushing through. Have I had setbacks? Every week. I mean, it's a weekly thing, the setbacks. You know, you give a developer something to do and you think, are you ever going to work on this or get this right? Do I have to do it for you? Which is kind of how you feel like sometimes. But my mentality now is that's okay. I manage it. I also manage my emotions and I work on the next thing while I'm waiting for them to kind of catch up to me.
And when you're managing your own emotions, what are some of your personal practices to manage your own emotions? Because business is an emotional adventure for most
Absolutely.
people. And anyone who denies that, no, it's not emotional. Of course it's emotional. People are going for the goal because they want a certain feeling. People are overcoming something and they feel a certain way. There's tons of emotional elements in every step of business
Look,
or
there are different
how are you
techniques
doing it?
there's different techniques for changing your subconscious. For me, a lot of it is self-talk because a lot of times we don't even realize we're self-talking. We're sitting there talking ourselves out of something. And that's not to say that I don't have at times the negative self-talk where I go, oh, you know, why do I do this to myself? But then there's the other part of me that goes, you know what? I can see what others can't see. And so if you really genuinely know where your North Star is, where you're aiming for, every diversion is a learning. Every time I've paid for a platform that I wanted to use and it hasn't worked, yes, there's been some pain with that. But then I've also learnt what I don't want. And that is just like any relationship. It's like when you're hiring your team. You get to learn after a while, this is not the right type of personality that should be sitting with what we are trying to build. And so it's all about learning. But we teach all of this in my course. So what I did recently to assist me is I built a card set, which I give for live learnings, right? Well, I don't know how you can see that. Sorry.
Oh,
Live
beautiful,
learnings.
beautiful.
I just pulled out some of the management ones. So what we do is we take them through stages. So these are the management styles. This is
Yeah.
just those cards. There's more cards, obviously. We talk about the traits. We talk about techniques. We then give them scenarios and we break them off into groups whereby we give them different scenarios that a manager would experience. And then and one of the techniques is storytelling, which I'm sure you've probably come across at some point because the subconscious doesn't learn by talking to it necessarily. Well, it does in self-talk, but not so talking isn't necessarily the best way. The subconscious learns through metaphors and images. And so we've all listened to speakers, we've all been at conferences, and there's those that just capture us. And you've probably covered this on the show before, but the conscious mind is a gatekeeper. It interferes with the changing of the operating system. So if I said to you, now, Kari, I want you to change this habit and don't do it ever again. You're going to go, yeah, okay, whatever. He says that, but I'll go do this anyhow. Your conscious mind has got in the middle of it and said, I make the decisions, but you want real change. So you have to change the subconscious. So in order to change the subconscious, I have to learn how to talk directly to it without the interference of this conscious mind. I'm sure you've covered this with some of your speakers, but we can do this through storytelling, because the conscious mind listens to the story and goes, oh, this is a really cool story. I'm really engaged. It's now engaged, and the subconscious is open to the symbols or the symbolic messages that you give within a story. And that's one way of creating change. And this is what managers can do. Learn to become great storytellers. If you learn how to do that with meaning behind it, it not only motivates your staff depending on the story that you tell, it changes them. You repeat this with different techniques, and you have the traits and all the things that we talk about in our trainings. You bring them on board on the journey. And that's a real important part of being a leader, because if your team are not on the journey, they're just employees.
It's interesting you say that, because I have a client who's very successful, exited a business, and has indicated at various points that they're very logical and analytical, that reporting type mentality or fact-based mentality is what they resonate with most.
Mm-hmm.
However, as they've been put in more of a mentor role since they've exited their own business, it's something that I've emphasized a couple of times, in that, this might be something you start to consider playing with, because it's going to reach more people. There's some people who really respond to the facts only and the numbers only, but that's not the majority. The majority are responding to the visuals, to the story,
Right.
and that's what ends up being memorable because of how it lands in their brain. So it's really interesting in how you describe the subconscious as the gatekeeper, because
I know the conscious mind is the gatekeeper.
the
subconscious is,
then
yeah,
the conscious mind
that's
is
right.
the gatekeeper, and the subconscious sitting there putting the information out, and then the unconscious, which we are not even aware of. At least we can tap into the subconscious a little bit, but the unconscious is still doing some things too, but we have no idea because we can't even
Well,
tap into it.
see, this goes back to the childhood thing I described earlier. The conscious mind wasn't around when you're a child. It was developing, but it wasn't there. So that's why all the operating system has been developed at those very young ages, in the first decade and a bit, because there was no gatekeeper stopping the programming.
Yeah.
Now, the problem we have is we're now programmed.
Yeah. Before the conscious mind was able to say, hey,
Yeah, correct.
there's a
And also,
filter there, and you're not going to ram the car in front of you because you're upset with them. But when you were 2 years old, you're going to take your little truck or your little thing and ram the other
yeah,
child that disagrees with you. So yeah, we don't have the filter.
correct. So management or leadership is different to management. You can be put in charge of people, but you can lead them. And the analogy I try to use very loosely is a military environment. If you were a captain of a brigade of soldiers and you said, let's go, together we're going to go fight, do they want to fight with you? Or would they rather kill you and go fight together themselves, all go in different directions. So the question is, are you able to bring them together to win the victory?
Yeah. Yeah. I think of it in terms of high performance sport. I have a background in high performance sport. And we always looked at teams, and we could typically take a look at it in groups of thirds. There was the third that were the high performers, the go-getters. They had the leadership qualities. And some of them didn't have the leadership qualities, but they were definitely the top tier. And then there's the third that was going to do the bare minimum. This is the same in business. Going to do the bare minimum. And then there's the middle third who are influenced either direction. And the key often was making sure that the middle third was being influenced in the direction that the leadership or the coaching staff wanted, because then that would naturally drop off some of the bottom third, and you've got a middle third that becomes more akin or like the top third. And
So you kind of, sorry, continue.
yeah. I was just going to say, without the appropriate leadership, whether it's from team captains, whether it's from coaching staff or influencers among the team, then that middle third could literally scatter.
Correct. So you hit on something that's quite important, the influences within the team. So what I used to do, and I've always done this in employed environments, is I have a leadership team below me. They're not official managers. None of them are managers. They're actually part of the team. But I would put together, so for example, same example of financial planning team, I would put a leadership team. So we had senior financial advisors and we had normal financial advisors. But as far as I was concerned, they're all advisors. But what I started off with is I would give the senior advisors this opportunity to demonstrate that they're going to be leaders within my team. And we would bring them in once every couple of months and we would discuss the business. This is how we're traveling, no different to what I would do on an executive level. This is how we're traveling. So they get some ownership. Because the problem is when they have no ownership, they just feel like they're just a football. People are making decisions on their behalf all the time and they get no say. So I created a leadership team within my group, and then I would change the leadership team along the way. So if someone isn't really demonstrating that leadership or buying into it, I would take one of the other ones and put them in. And people would vie for these positions. I would have people going, I really, really want to get into your leadership team. I go, great. This is what I need to see from you.
It's the incentive of you quickly discover who wants more growth, who is inspired by whatever is their next level or whatever is the next level of the company or the group. So that inspires them and it pulls that out. And if that didn't exist, if you hadn't created that, then you're not able to see as clearly who's willing to stretch themselves, stretch their own limits.
Correct. So you're giving someone an opportunity to feel like they have a say. And most people, and I'm sure you know this from your own careers, is that when you're at a certain level, you feel like in some ways you're powerless. You haven't decided the direction of the company. You haven't decided that if this could affect, they've made a change that might affect your income, which affects everything else in your life. But when you suddenly start to engage them and go, I want to know what you've got to say, because I remember running a business session many years ago, smaller practice. And I always said to the owner, these are self-employed people, I want all your staff there. And they go, well, everybody, even the receptionist. I said, yeah, I want everybody there. And so they'd bring the whole team in. It was maybe 20, 30 people. It wasn't a massive company. And I run them through a program. But then I would go around the room and ask questions of, okay, so I know the boss is in the room, but pretend he's not here today. How can we improve it? What if your if your company was to be listed on the stock exchange, would you buy the shares in this company? And I can remember asking the receptionist this question in this example, and she goes, no. I said, why wouldn't you? She goes, this, and this. Now, she would never tell the boss that directly to his face because she's the lowest position in this whole organization. But she came out with some brilliant ideas, which they never thought about. And that's when I talk about engaging people and consulting people, because the greatest ideas don't necessarily come from us in management. They come from those in the field.
Yeah, because there's a different perspective. We can't see what we can't see. Sometimes what's right next to us, we keep missing because we're living with it. It's right there.
Correct. We get, as management or leaders, we get, after a while, if you've been in it for a long time, you can become separated from what it really is. It's the view of the echo chamber of each telling each other how you should be thinking,
Mm-hmm.
whereby when someone's out in the field, and I'm sure you've had this, and I'm sure those that are listening have had exactly the same thing when they held junior positions or lower positions. No one's listening to us. They made another silly decision at head office.
Yeah.
You know, this is not going to make us go forward. And that's why this becomes a team thing. It's not that your employees tell you all of how you're going to operate, but what they're going to do is they're going to make you better than what you are if you're prepared to listen.
The structure, the leadership structure sounds very the typical triangle where there's either the CEO, the board, there's that
Yep.
kind of overall structure. There's some philosophies that turn the structure. So it's more of a horizontal model versus a vertical model. Any thoughts on that with what you've experienced and what you create?
I think, Kari, that comes with size of organization.
Mhm.
So, you know, I've worked for major corporations and I've worked for some smaller ones as well. In a smaller one, you can have the flatter model because you can walk up to the CEO. But a lot of the corporations that I work for were, I used to live in Melbourne. That's where most of my career was. That's where I was brought up. But most of them were in Sydney. Most of the financial services head offices are in Sydney, except for one. So I would, I couldn't walk up to the CEO. I might
Yeah.
see the CEO or I might be in a meeting with him
Yeah.
for different things, but it depends on the size. I mean, but a major corporation. So I'd work for a bank and I knew the CEO of the bank because he was just down, you know, his office wasn't far
Yeah.
from mine. But he reported to, and I reported to the larger bank,
Yeah.
which owned all these operations. And even though I met all these CEOs, I didn't necessarily get on the phone to them and say, hey, how's it going? I
Yeah.
might send them an email occasionally if I thought something might need to change.
It's interesting because these are the very differences, the very key differences between large corporate structures versus smaller startups, smaller businesses, because the smaller businesses become very agile. They can pivot, they can change their style, they can do a number of
Great.
things. And that's what gives them an advantage of moving very quickly. Whereas larger corporate structures, whether it even is in education, government, um, and big business, it's harder to do that. And you see the red tape, you see the struggle, you see the traditionalist ways of operating, and that can be very challenging to manage some of what's happening with technology today, like AI or just the difference, even cybersecurity, the differences of what the demands are now versus even 5 years ago, let alone 10 years.
Absolutely.
So any thoughts on some of the the needs now? What do you think is going to really be disruptive?
I think the workplace is changing. COVID changed our workplaces.
Yeah.
people don't even think the same way that I used to think. I can remember having a conversation with my brother. My brother he now works in financial services, but he heads up digital. So he's not really like where I came through. And I can remember in the middle of COVID or towards the end of COVID, and he was saying, and I'm going, people will probably go back to their offices eventually, go back to norm that we're used to. And he goes, you're behind the times. No one's going back to the office anymore. We all stay at home. And I thought, well, did you say that because you don't want anyone to see what you're actually doing, which is quite possible in some cases. I always say in that example it depends on the type of corporation that you're working with. Some jobs can be done from home, and some jobs you've got to be together. It's just the way it operates. So sorry, your question was,
Well, in what's disrupting now, whether it's COVID was extremely disruptive to your point on whether people are working from home or not. And then some companies adapted to keeping some level of hybrid. Others brought everybody back. Others, are okay with doing some remote work. But now we're looking at things like cybersecurity, more of a prevalence of AI. How is that, do you think, going to be disruptive, or what are your
I
thoughts?
think it's funny because about 6-7 years ago, I remember reading a report saying that the majority of, in this case, financial services roles would disappear by 2022 or something.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know if that's completely happened, but this is the fear of people with AI is it's going to replace everything we do. And in some ways it can. I'm
Mm-hmm.
very much into AI, so I'm very knowledgeable of what is there. I mean, they're creating AI agents that can replace a lot of jobs and just do them for you.
Mm-hmm.
I look at AI a little bit differently. I see it as a tool. For some of the things that I've created, and I do a lot of them by myself, it has sped everything up for me. If I had to pay 5 people to do which really I can get done quickly, it has allowed me to run a smaller business, a more efficient business. Now, should people be scared? No, this is why improvement is something that's really important, because if you're constantly improving, you add value. And that's the bit that you should always be thinking as an employee is, how am I adding more value than I added 1 year ago?
Yeah. Yeah.
When you're going to an interview, you're trying to sell what your value is.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I mean, that really comes down to the leadership as well. So the employee is trying to add value. That's going to hold their value to the company, whether AI is taking over or not. And same for the leader, because the AI is augmenting so many things, including a leader's weakness. So to me, it's not necessarily be afraid of losing your job. Be afraid of not holding your own against where AI can augment where the weaknesses are.
I think that's a great take. I think that, when I first started in banking, we're talking about a long time ago, but when I first started as a junior, I can remember, so in those days, they used to have the branch manager. I worked in branches when I started, a branch manager, and you had what they called an accountant. They weren't accountant qualified, but they were called an accountant that ran the branch pretty much. And I can remember the guy who's the accountant, really good worker, smart guy, had no idea about computers. And they weren't a big thing in those days. There were more terminals where you just keyed in information. But he really was scared of it. And he was scared of people. And he was scared of people that had qualifications. And I had decided to go work to buy a car, but then I was going to go to uni the next year. And he didn't tell the bank that I was studying, which he should have, because that affects my career. And he wasn't a bad guy. It was just people have a fear of what they don't know or don't think they know. AI is fascinating if you really get into it. The things that it can do is amazing and where they're going with it. I would rather ride the wave than be drowned by it.
Mhm.
And I think that's something to live by in regards to anything of learning, is that you can sit there and go, look, I'm a big manager. I don't really care. We are all replaceable unless you make sure you're not replaceable.
Mhm. I love that. And in mindfulness of our time, I want to wrap up on that. I think that's such a powerful message. It it especially emphasizes that this is a wave, and we could be taken under by this wave, but we have a choice, and we can really emphasize our own growth, emphasize what we're capable of with what's going on. You have mannyfiteni.com. You have your mindgrowth360.com. Is there anywhere else people can reach you?
Probably the best place to go to, which covers all my different businesses, is mygrowthcorporation.com.
Excellent.
And that covers everything that we're either working on or is coming. And it takes you to all the different websites, depending on what you want. So Mind Growth 360 is a social network designed purely for personal development.
Excellent. Mindgrowthcorporation.com. I love it. And are there any last words that you would want to impart on leaders aside from what you've already said? Is there any last nugget of wisdom that maybe you wish you heard when you were leading so many people or when you first started?
I think the way I learned, because I never attended a management course either, is I observed those that people wanted to follow. Take the observations. A lot of managers follow bad managers because they want a promotion from that manager. Instead, find the really good ones and emulate them.
That is excellent advice because it's part of what you are able to offer so many because you've been doing that for so long. Bringing all your learnings into one place, creating what will really help others. I really appreciate this talk. This has been
I've
fabulous.
enjoyed it. I appreciate it too.
This is excellent. So I look forward to having our listeners reach out and ask you more questions. And it's just been wonderful to speak with you.
Same here. And I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Manny.
Thank you.